Before a single word was spoken, the classroom already knew how to behave. Chairs scraped softly across wooden floors, chalk dust hung in the air, and 30 children sat upright, hands folded, waiting. In a 1960s British school, silence wasn't requested. It arrived on its own. There were rules you didn't read and boundaries you didn't test. A look from the front of the room was often enough. What's hard to explain now is how ordinary it all felt. Moments that would cause uproar today passed without comment then. Parents rarely asked questions. Children rarely expected them to. It was simply how school worked, how growing up worked, how authority worked. Most pupils accepted it without a second thought, and that may be the most surprising part of all. To understand why we need to step outside the classroom and into the Britain that shaped it at the time itself, to understand why nobody questioned school discipline in the 1960s, you have to remember that Britain children were growing up and this was a country still shaped by the aftermath of war, where order, routine, and respect were seen as essential, not optional. Many parents had grown up with ration books, shared bedrooms, and the steady message that you got on with things without complaint. Authority flowed downward and was rarely challenged. Doctors, police officers, head teachers, and teachers were trusted figures woven into the fabric of everyday life. If a teacher said something had happened at school, it was generally taken as fact. Home and school were not opposing forces. They were parts of the same system. Discipline, in that context, wasn't viewed as harsh or unusual. It was seen as preparation. Preparation for factory floors, offices, apprenticeships, and a world that expected punctuality, obedience, and resilience. Children were not encouraged to question why rules existed, only to learn them quickly. Today, classrooms emphasize discussion, emotional awareness, and individual needs. Back then, structure came first, and feelings came later, if at all. Understanding that wider mindset helps explain why practices that feel shocking now once blended quietly into everyday school life. It also reminds us that childhood expectations were different, shaped by scarcity and certainty, and that schools reflected the adult world children were being prepared to enter, not the one we try to protect them within today. That difference sits quietly behind every remembered classroom moment from that era. For many pupils, lessons in the 1960s extended far beyond reading, writing, and sums. They were woven into the rhythm of the school day, so familiar they barely registered as remarkable. A child might be asked to stand slightly apart from classmates, not as a dramatic moment, but as a quiet signal that rules mattered. No explanation was expected. Everyone understood what it meant, and the lesson landed without a word needing to be said. Public reminders of rules were equally routine. A name written neatly on the board, lines copied carefully into an exercise book, or time spent in a hushed corridor were all part of the same system. This was so common, it barely raised an eyebrow. Children accepted it as naturally as lining up for assembly or putting milk bottles away after break. There was rarely anger attached to it, just a sense of order being restored. What's striking, looking back, is how little drama surrounded these moments. Many pupils didn't even tell their parents. It wasn't secrecy. It simply didn't seem important enough to mention. School had its own world, its own rules, and children learned early how to move within them. You followed instructions, kept your head down, and carried on. The atmosphere mattered as much as the actions themselves. Long corridors felt endless and quiet. Classrooms seemed formal, with desks in rows and walls lined with charts and careful handwriting. Even the sound of footsteps could feel amplified. These spaces reinforced the idea that school was serious business, not to be questioned or negotiated with. Today, schools work hard to create environments where children feel heard and supported. Conversations replace commands. Feelings are named and explored. Back then, expectations were simpler but firmer. You learned where you stood very quickly, and that clarity brought its own sense of security, even if it sometimes came with discomfort. None of this was seen as cruel at the time. It was considered character building, a way of teaching children how the wider world operated. Adults believed they were preparing young people for workplaces and communities that valued discipline and conformity. In that context, these practices felt practical, even necessary. Memory softens some edges, of course. Some people recall those years with gratitude for the structure and certainty they provided. Others remember moments of embarrassment that lingered longer than the lesson itself. Both memories can exist side by side. What unites them is how normal it all felt then and how unusual it feels now. When we look back, it's easy to judge with modern eyes. But to truly understand those classrooms, we have to see them as their pupils did at the time, not as places of debate or self-expression, but as training grounds for life as it was expected to be lived. And it's only when we step back from those routines that we can begin to see how deeply they shaped a generation, quietly and without fuss, every single school day. Ask anyone who was there, and the memories don't all sound the same. For some, school discipline brought a sense of certainty. You knew where you stood, what was expected, and how to avoid trouble next time. That structure built resilience, a feeling that you could endure small discomforts and carry on regardless. For others, the feelings were more complicated. There could be embarrassment that lingered after the bell rang, or a quiet unease that followed you through the afternoon. The long walk home often became a place of reflection, replaying the day's events in silence, wondering what might be said, or whether it was better left unmentioned. Many children simply accepted it. They didn't have the language to question it, or the expectation that adults would explain themselves. Authority was something you adjusted to, not something you challenged. Those experiences settled into memory in different ways, shaping how people later viewed confidence, fairness, and respect. Today, we talk more openly about feelings in schools. Back then, emotions were carried privately, tucked away with books and lunch tins, and remembered quietly for years. That private endurance became part of how a generation learned to navigate authority, memory, and adulthood later. Looking at classrooms today, it's clear how much has changed. Rules are discussed, feelings are acknowledged, and support sits at the heart of learning. Many of the practices once taken for granted would feel unthinkable now, yet they belonged to a time with different expectations and different pressures. What's worth remembering is that both eras share the same purpose. Schools then and now aim to prepare children for the world ahead, whatever that world looks like. Methods change because society changes. When we look back, we're not peering into distant history. It wasn't ancient history, it was just yesterday.